The guy who lived in a jar was freer. Picture a man living inside a giant clay jar. No rent, no neighbor complaining about noise, no Wi-Fi either. But that was normal back then, so it doesn't count as sacrifice. People walked by and pitied him. He walked by and pitied them back. Technical tie, but he figured he was winning by a mile. Nothing to lose his power. This man walked the streets of Athens in broad daylight, holding a lit lantern, like during the day, sun blazing right up there. People asked why. He'd say, "I'm looking for an honest man." And he never found one. He'd thrown away home, money, and reputation, and somehow still seemed to be having more fun than any politician in the square. Freedom looks like madness outside. His name was Diógenes of Sinope, and he is, without exaggeration, the spiritual grandfather of every troll you've ever seen online. And the crazy idea he took seriously his entire life still bothers rich people to this day. Maybe being nobody is the only real way to be free. Freedom asks no approval. Relax, this isn't an invitation to quit your job and move into a barrel tonight. It's about no longer outsourcing your peace to other people's opinions. And, hilariously, a whole bunch of serious thinkers, over 2,000 years, arrived close to the same conclusion a Greek beggar had already been living without a single diploma. The guy who thought less was winning. Diogenes was born in a wealthy city, son of a banker, and got exiled after a counterfeit coin scandal. Lost everything. The normal reaction would be to rebuild the fortune. His reaction was, fine, then I'll just lose everything on purpose, but in style. Loss became his tool. Arriving in Athens reeking of failure, he went and asked philosopher Antisthenes to take him on as a student. Antisthenes, sick of him, actually hit the guy with a staff to drive him off. Diogenes just stood there taking the beating, saying no stick was big enough to drive off someone that stubborn. That, by the way, sums up 90% of his personality. Antisthenes probably thought, this guy never gives up. And he was right. Years later, Antisthenes himself would call Diogenes the most talented student he ever had. Pure irony for a relationship that started with a beating. He cut his possessions down to the bone. A cloak, a staff, a bag of stale bread. He moved into a pithos, that big clay jar the Greeks used to store grain, planted right in the middle of the public square, like pitching a camping tent inside a mall. Fewer things, fewer chains. One day, he saw a kid drinking water by cupping it in their hands. Diogenes looked at his own bowl, the only thing of value he still owned, and tossed it right there, saying he'd just been out-minimalisted by a 5-year-old. Most of us would feel embarrassed. He felt proud. Simplicity can be a win. Behind all the clowning, his logic was sharp. Everything you own also owns you back. Every nice thing you have is one more thing to defend, lock up, insure against theft. Diogenes chose to own nothing worth stealing. Practical result, zero anxiety about home security. The lantern lit in broad daylight. Diogenes belonged to a philosophical school called Cynicism, founded by Antisthenes, that same staff-wielding gentleman who also believed virtue mattered more than social etiquette. Spoiler: social etiquette lost badly. Virtue beat social etiquette. The word cynic comes from the Greek kynikos, meaning like a dog. Today, that would sound offensive. To them, it was a compliment. Dogs don't fake it, don't flatter, don't stress about needing status to be happy. A dog does its business wherever and moves on with life. Diogenes looked at that and thought, geniuses. If LinkedIn existed in ancient Greece, his title would be something like Senior Consultant in Zero Shame, and the bio would probably read, currently available, literally, in a jar. He was publicly nicknamed the Dog, and wore it like an Olympic medal. He said dogs recognize friend from foe on pure instinct, without being fooled by expensive clothes or pretty speeches, which already puts most dogs ahead of most politicians. So, fair's fair. Instinct doesn't lie like speeches. He ate in public, considered way too gross for the era, kind of like eating a burger in front of formal dinner guests today. Once, he begged a statue for spare change. People laughed, sure he'd finally lost it. He explained, dead serious, that he was training himself to handle rejection, since the statue never gave him anything either. Every no from the statue was practice in not caring. Shame was his real target. The provocation was never pointless. It was a lesson, disguised as chaos. And the lantern lit in broad daylight, searching for an honest man, was the perfect summary. In a city full of people faking virtue, he dared anyone to prove they were the real thing. No one ever did. The day the beggar humbled the king. Diogenes' most famous story involves Alexander the Great. Yes, that Alexander, the one who conquered the known world before turning 30. Power has practical limits too. Alexander, an admitted fan of Diogenes' reputation, went to visit him in person, which is already hilarious. The most powerful man on the planet took time out of his schedule to go chat with a homeless guy. He found the philosopher lying down, sunbathing, in absolutely no hurry to get up for the emperor. Alexander said he could grant any wish Diogenes had. Gold, land, an entire army. Just name it. Diogenes looked at him and said, "You could get out of my sunlight." That's it. The guy with unlimited power offered the universe, and the request was, "Get out of my light, man." One request said it all. The whole guard froze, bracing for an imminent beheading. Nobody talked to Alexander like that. But he laughed, because right there, he'd found something none of his armies had ever conquered, a man completely immune to his authority. Not money, not fear, nothing worked on that guy. Imagine the report the generals had to write afterward. Today, the emperor offered the world to a beggar, and the beggar asked him to step aside. No execution occurred. Strangely, the emperor seemed pleased. Legend says Alexander walked away and remarked, "If I weren't Alexander, I would want to be Diogenes." Think about that. The man who had everything, admitting the beggar had something better. Probably the only comparison he ever lost in his life. Ironically, the two are said to have died on the very same day, decades later, one surrounded by conspiracies and a messy succession, the other sunbathing in peace, with no heirs fighting over his jar. His peace had no heirs. The cult born from a shipwreck. Diogenes' cynicism didn't die with him. Years later, a merchant named Zeno lost his entire ship, cargo and all, in a shipwreck. He showed up in Athens with nothing, like literally zero, and stumbled onto the Cynic teachings by chance. Picture the scene. The guy loses his entire fortune at sea, and fate, with all the humor it could muster, decides the right response is becoming a philosopher instead of just getting a normal job. A tragedy birthed a school. He consulted an oracle on how to live well and got something like, "Study the ancients." Finding that too vague to be useful, he went to a bookshop, ran into texts about Socrates, and asked where he could find people like that today. The bookseller pointed at a guy walking by. It was Crates, the beggar philosopher, a direct student of Diogenes. Zeno followed the beggar. Stoicism was born. Wisdom had no fixed address. But let's pause here, because otherwise this video turns into an ad for quit everything and become a beggar philosopher, and that's not the point. Diogenes took detachment to the extreme. He rejected every social convention and provoked everyone in public on purpose. Zeno took that same freedom and organized it into a more systematic philosophy, one you could actually apply to real life, no clay jar required. In one sentence, Diogenes lived freedom in a radical way. Zeno turned that freedom into a system you can use while still having a job, a house, and a bank account. That answers a question that naturally comes up watching this. Can I still have money then? Yes. For a Stoic, owning wealth was never the problem. The problem is wealth owning you back, to the point where you panic just imagining losing it. Wealth can't own you. Centuries later, Epictetus, who had also been a slave, taught the same practical lesson as Diogenes and the sun. Some things depend on you, some don't. Other people's opinions, reputation, status, outside your control. Your reaction, that's the only thing that's truly yours. What they think isn't yours. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, took this same principle to the absolute top of power, reminding himself daily that fame was fleeting and that he was just another mortal wearing an expensive crown. The seed planted by a guy in a clay jar reached the mind of Rome's most powerful emperor. Not bad for someone without even a house. And to think that these days some people can't even shake off a mean comment on a barbecue photo. The illusion of being somebody. On the other side of the world, with zero contact with Greece, Buddhism arrived at a suspiciously similar conclusion to Diogenes's by a completely different path. Two traditions, one conclusion. The concept of anatta, or non-self, teaches that the fixed, hugely important self you spend your whole life trying to protect and inflate is, technically, a very well-produced mental fiction. There's no solid somebody to defend. There's a constantly moving process that the mind insists on treating like a statue. It's like finding out the main character of your life is actually a script in permanent draft mode, and nobody ever told you that you could stop trying to print the final version. Wandering monks lived a lot like Diogenes. No fixed possessions, relying on other people's charity, no address. Begging wasn't shameful, it was a method, sort of a crash course in stop taking yourself so seriously. Monks lived without fixed attachment. Philosopher Alan Watts, one of the greatest Western translators of these ideas, said much of human suffering comes exactly from the desperate attempt to be a permanent, recognized somebody in a world that keeps changing and never asked permission to. Defending a fixed self tires. Buddhist monks developed specific practices to weaken this attachment to the ego: meditation, detachment, silence. It was never about disappearing. It was about no longer burning vital energy defending an image that, in the end, was never as solid as its Instagram suggested. Science confirmed you compare too much. Psychologist Leon Festinger, in 1954, scientifically proved something your grandma already knew. Humans constantly measure their own worth by comparing themselves to the people around them. Comparing is an automatic habit. Festinger showed this isn't a conscious choice. It's automatic, firing off without asking permission, even in completely irrelevant situations, like comparing how many likes you got against how many your cousin got on a barbecue photo. More recent studies, aimed at social media, found a clear link between screen time and personal dissatisfaction, because the platform shows you an edited, well-lit, filtered sample of people winning at life 24 hours a day without ever stopping to catch a breath. Edited lives deceive better. The problem is, this comparison never truly satisfies. You climb one rung, someone appears one rung higher, and the hamster keeps running on the wheel. They call it the hedonic treadmill. Diogenes, with no PhD whatsoever, had already figured out the trap in practice. If you step off the race, the hamster stops bothering you. Stepping off is also winning. And keep in mind, he didn't even have the internet to compare himself to anyone. Imagine the damage he'd do today, commenting under some millionaire's photo. Nice marble jar, mine's clay, and it works just fine too. The freedom of not needing applause. Psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan cooked up self-determination theory, splitting motivation into two types: intrinsic, which comes from within, and extrinsic, which depends on likes, praise, and other people's approval. External motivation never satisfies. According to the two, people who live dependent on outside approval report lower long-term well-being, even when they get what they wanted. It's like eating fries hoping to feel full forever. Never works. You always want just one more. A like is basically an emotional French fry. Addictive, empty, and 2 hours later, you're hungry again. Diogenes was the total opposite. He cut off any dependence on approval, and that's exactly why no criticism could ever land on him. He'd already decided, on his own, what he was worth. His piece needed no audience. Psychologist Carl Rogers called this dependency conditions of worth, the belief that you only deserve love if you meet certain externally imposed standards. Rogers saw maturity as the process of tossing those conditions out and starting to validate yourself from within. Diogenes did this centuries before therapy existed, and for free. Validating from within is maturity. The gaze that became an invisible cage. French philosopher Michel Foucault described how modern societies control people without needing a single chain. All it takes is eyes, real or imagined. Being watched already disciplines. He used the image of the panopticon, a prison built so the inmate never knew for sure if he was being watched at that exact moment, but knew he might be. The fear of surveillance alone was enough to control behavior, without spending a single cent on extra guards. Today, that's just routine. Social media works as a voluntary panopticon. You dress, speak, and post while imagining an audience that might not even be watching, like an actor rehearsing for an empty theater every single day. You became your own guard. Foucault didn't live to see Instagram, but if he had, he'd probably have said, "I told you so," just in much more elegant French, full of unnecessary commas. Diogenes lived the absolute opposite of that. He ate with his hands in public, slept in a jar, lived with zero shame, because he'd simply eliminated the fear of other people's judgment. He knew he was being watched. He just stopped thinking that meant anything about his worth. Being seen isn't being judged. Simplicity as an act of rebellion. Centuries later, writer Henry David Thoreau went to live alone in a cabin by Walden Pond, drastically cutting his material needs in an echo that almost plagiarized cynic philosophy. Need less, gain freedom. Thoreau knew the Greek texts well and openly cited the ancient philosophers as inspiration for his own experiment. He wrote that most men live lives of quiet desperation, working too hard to sustain things that never deliver the happiness promised in the ad. Basically, Thoreau looked at 19th century American society, saw everyone working like maniacs to buy things they didn't need, to impress people they didn't even like, and thought, "I'm gonna go live alone in a cabin, thanks." Psychoanalyst Erich Fromm formalized a similar idea in To Have or To Be. For him, modern societies teach people to seek identity through possession. Car, type. The more you define yourself by what you have, the more fragile you get when you lose it, or never get it at all. Fromm wrote this decades before the word flex existed, but he basically described the behavior with terrifying precision, having defines a fragile life. Fromm argued that living in being mode instead of having mode creates a far more stable identity because it doesn't depend on any external circumstance. Diogenes had already been living that 2,000 years earlier, and he didn't even have access to self-help books, motivational podcasts, or a life purpose coach. Being can't be stolen. So, what do you do with all this? Relax. Nobody here is asking you to quit everything today and go live in a ceramic vessel in the middle of the square. Diogenes took his philosophy to the extreme, and most of us, reasonably, would rather keep wearing clothes and having a fixed address. Your mother-in-law probably prefers that too, but the core of the idea remains valuable, maybe more today than ever. The less your peace depends on likes, approval, or recognition, the freer you actually get. This isn't giving up. It's the most advanced form of savagery there is. Nobody can emotionally blackmail you once you've already decided you don't need their approval. Less approval, more real freedom. Start small. Next time you feel the urge to buy, post, or say something just to be seen a certain way, pause for a second. Ask, is this what I actually want, or just theater for an imaginary audience? The question alone kills half the impulse. Notice, too, how much of your day goes into managing the image other people have of you. Diogenes had no image to manage at all. He spent all that time sunbathing and roasting kings for free. Managing image costs real time, and he pulled this off without any productivity app, no planner, no yearly goals. Just him, the jar, and a lantern lit in broad daylight, looking for someone honest enough to keep him company. Diogenes, Zeno, Epictetus, Buddhist monks, Thoreau, Fromm, Festinger, Dacey, and Ryan, Foucault, people from completely different traditions, centuries, and continents, landing close to the same cosmic joke. The need to be a recognized somebody rarely delivers the peace it advertises. The freedom of being nobody, ironically, is what's left over once you stop needing it. Being nobody is also freedom. If you want more content like this, subscribe to the channel. See you next time.